joining us now is the former Conservative Party leader, Sir Iain Duncan Smith. Thank you so much for being on the programme. I'm very keen to talk to you about China, but just first, we've just heard from the German ambassador, and I was quite interested in what he said on Brexit. He said that he was quite optimistic that there would be a change in tone on the talks on Northern Ireland, that there would be a closer relationship between the EU and the UK. What's your sort of sense of where Rishi Sunak is when it comes to Brexit?
Well, I think the truth is it's not really where Rishi Sunak is, I think, because I think he would love to have a good engagement. I think there's a big question mark for what the European Union wants to do, because in the protocol, it's quite clear that two things. One, Good Friday Agreement trumps everything else. And at the moment, we have a problem because consent doesn't take place in Northern Ireland, so which is why the unions have walked away from the Assembly. And the second thing is very important. Article 13.8 make it absolutely clear if there are any problems with the protocol can be changed in whole or in part. Right now, Mr. Šefčovič does not have the power to negotiate on 13.8, which is critical because it's not working. So what we're doing at the moment is still a slight kind of elaborate dance around this. At the heart of this is Article 13.8. I know it sounds technical, but it says the protocol can be changed in whole or in part. It's not working. We should be discussing that. And both sides reach an agreement which allows them to respect each other's market requirements. I think that's the key.
OK, interesting. Perhaps slightly further away than a previous guest.
Maybe not. Maybe not.
OK, now you are one of the most outspoken critics of China. You've previously been sanctioned by them for speaking out about the Uyghurs. So I'm interested to know your thoughts on the extraordinary scenes we've seen recently of people taking to the streets to protest. Initially, of course, about the anti-lockdown rules. About the lockdown rules. Do you think change could be happening in China?
The trouble is, I think, with all of us in the West, is that we're basically all decent people who believe in democracy, freedom, human rights, all the rest of it, whether you're in Germany or in France or in Britain or wherever or in America. Our tendency is we always want to believe that the good is coming and that somehow the natural order of things is democracy, human rights and the rule of law. But with China, I think we have to have a reality check. This is a brutal dictatorial government that thinks nothing of incarcerating people. It's carrying out genocide amongst the Uyghur in Xinjiang. I mean, literally slave labour. Products we buy have got slave labour in them here, all around the Western world, and we've done very little to stop that. So this is a government that thinks nothing of cracking down. So their control is total. They use technology in a way that we just couldn't imagine over here. All of that tells me that they're not going anywhere soon. They are determined that their form of government is right and they will not let up. So whilst they might modify around the edges because the COVID issue is causing them economic problems as well, I don't think we should overread this at all. President Xi is absolutely determined that the form of government China has is the form of government for everywhere, and he's selling it to the developing world right now.
You're very strong in your condemnation of what you see as a brutal regime. What should be the UK government response? How should we go about our relationship with China?
Well, I'm deeply disappointed in my government over this particular area because, of course, the Prime Minister said during the summer that he thought that China represented a systemic threat. And then recently he's shifted that to systemic challenge. The problem with challenge is it looks weak. We've now got a policy which sounds like it could have come from Sir Humphrey in Yes Minister, which is robust pragmatism. Now, if somebody can please tell me what robust pragmatism means, it means nothing. Robust, but also pragmatic, they cancel each other out. The reality we've got to do is we've got to change our integrated review to put China in as a systemic threat. The Americans are way ahead of us on this. Other countries in Europe are talking about it. We, the UK, could risk being left behind, dragging our feet. From that, everything flows from that about how we relate to China.
What does that mean in practical terms? I mean, I know you talked a bit about smart meters, for example, before. Are there any kind of concrete examples of what acknowledging or saying that China is a systematic threat would mean?
Being a systemic threat, then going into the integrated review as a threat, as Russia was, means that everything that the government does then flows from that point. So it means that you can no longer be ambivalent about what China does. You have to view it in the light of it being a threat. So that means, for example, we've got illegal, I think they're illegal, but the government seems to turn a blind eye to them, Chinese police stations bullying Chinese expats to go back. They're not alone in this. They're in all sorts of countries, Holland, the Netherlands, Germany, all these countries, but they're being much more aggressive about it. The Hollanders shut down theirs the other day. America's kicking them out. Yet we seem to be completely ambivalent about whether or not they're doing this bullying, having video links back to Beijing with their families brought in, being threatened in front of them if they don't go back. We've got this new embassy complex that they want to build, which is the biggest embassy complex in the whole of Europe, right in the heart of Europe, right next door to the City of London. You know, really astonishingly inept if the government now allows the appeal to go through. We can go on, all these things. Confucius Institute spying on Chinese students. Our university is completely dependent on Chinese money, and us, as an economy, far too dependent on China, a dictatorial regime. None of this can happen unless we see them as a threat. That's the key.
The pragmatism is the economic reality of it, right? That's how some would see it. At a time when, you know, it looks by all accounts like we are in a recession, do we not need to have that trade relationship with China for the good of the economy?
Well, it depends what your trade-off is. I think this is a trade-off in human lives. For me, the Uyghur being incarcerated, the women sterilised, forcibly sterilised, often raped. We've got children in re-education camps. We've got just a ton of men in forced labour camps, thousands of miles away from their family, never seeing their family again. That's just one bit of it. You've got Tibet, forced labour camps. You've got the Christian churches, the evangelical churches being cracked down on, arrests taking place, Hong Kong, you know, people being arrested for their peaceful democracy campaigns. I mean, where do you draw the line? Do we turn a blind eye to all of that and say, we just go on making money out of China? My answer is diversify. Bring some of these technologies back to Europe, to the continent of Europe, to Britain, to America. Actually start looking at India and others to invest more in, to develop them as a counterbalance. Can't go on turning a blind eye to the fact that our cheaper products come from countries that use slave labour. Not on.
I just want to talk to you a little bit, as if at the end, about the state of the Conservative Party. Polling still looking pretty difficult, to say the least. You obviously lost the Chester by-election. That itself wasn't a surprise, but Labour achieved their greatest result there for 200 years. Nadeem Zahawi said that, looking at the polls, he thinks Keir Starmer should be worried. Do you think that's right?
Well, interestingly, John Curtis, the day after, said that whilst this would give Labour this result, probably a majority, he didn't say a massive majority. His point was making that you'd have expected them to do better. I'm not now going to be clever about this, but the truth is, if you're in opposition, you should be winning a by-election like that, midterm, with all our problems right now, by a massive degree, and it wasn't as big. Now, having said that, we lost it. So the Conservatives shouldn't go around telling themselves all is OK because it's going to come right in the end.
Also, for seats like yours, I mean, your majority is, what, just over 1,000?
It's about 1,200, I think.
Yeah, you could be in trouble.
Yeah, well, I've been told I'm in trouble for the last 3 elections, but I've managed to get back. All I would say is that the Conservatives shouldn't be complacent. We have to get this economy growing. At the heart of this lies people's fears about 2 things, I think. One is obviously about migration, the boats crossing the Channel, which is headline stuff and really worrying people. The second bit, importantly, though, is growth. All the economies of Europe facing very much the same struggle, but the UK has got now the highest tax rate that it's had for a generation, and we've got to get that down. So we need growth back in the economy, easily by next spring, so that we can start to put these things right and people can feel better off with access to jobs and to good incomes. These are the key things that will win us through at the end, not tokenistic excuses about the fact it could have been better for Labour than it was.
You, of course, know what it was like to lead the Conservative Party in the depths of opposition. Do you think you might be heading back into that wilderness?
All political parties in government face the prospect of losing the next election because elections are about your record, often more than they are about the alternative. So the key question for us is to get the choice much more difficult for the public. Otherwise, we would end up going into opposition. And that means making them make a choice. And if we have growth, if we have an economy going forward, if we have people getting jobs, livelihoods looking better, people able to pay their mortgages, and we get that migration issue under control, then we're in the races and we have a chance of winning back into government. OK,
it sounds like a tough challenge.
Very tough.
Thank you very much for being on the programme and speaking so strongly about China as well. Thank you.